my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses.
Is there any specific evidence that backs up Donald Trump's claims, President Trump's claims, that DEI or FAA hiring practices are responsible in any way for this tragedy at Reagan National?
So, Jake, I think the better question is, am I going to guarantee the American people that only the best and the brightest serve in this incredibly important body of the Department of Transportation, that they're driven by safety and DEI doesn't matter? So I do know that in the last administration, they were focused on not safety, but they were focused on changing the name from cockpit to flight deck.
The head of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association says that all air traffic controllers are subject to rigorous training and that, quote, the standards to achieve certification have nothing to do with race or gender or anything else. So it sounds like you're saying that there isn't any evidence right now that this affected the accident because it's so early. You'll let us know if there is any, but I just don't know of any evidence. And if there is some, please tell us that DEI had anything to do with the tragedy itself.
What's up, everybody? Major Retired Richard Ojeda here, and President Donald Trump took aim at Democrats and DEI at his first news conference after the tragedy. He repeatedly suggested without evidence that it was somehow connected to diversity hiring policies at the FAA.
The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so.
While families were mourning the loss of 67 lives, including young, promising U.S. figure skaters, Donald Trump saw this as the perfect opportunity to stir the pot and point fingers, claiming that Biden's DEI policies were to blame for this horrific crash.
We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen.
According to him, these policies led to hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. But here's the kicker. Those exact same policies were in place during Donald Trump's presidency. This so-called threat was already alive and well during his entire administration, and yet he didn't say a word about it at the time. CNN interviewed Daniel Dale, and he pointed out that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that DEI had anything to do with this horrific crash. None. Zilch.
I think we have to say first and foremost that there is zero evidence whatsoever that anything to do with the FAA's efforts to hire people of diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, had anything to do with this tragedy. So I think this is one of these fact checks where it's like, wait, why are we even talking about this?
He explained that the FAA's efforts to hire people with disabilities weren't something that started under President Biden. They've been in place since at least 2013, even under Trump. And Dale went further to reveal that in 2019, during Trump's time in office, the FAA launched a pilot program to hire people with these so-called targeted disabilities. Trump didn't have a problem with them then, but now he wants to label it a crisis. Give us all a break. And let's not forget the victims of this crash. Not once did Donald Trump offer condolences. Not once did he acknowledge the immense loss these families were enduring. Instead, he chose to spin a false narrative, reducing these victims, young athletes with dreams and futures, to a mere footnote in his culture war rant. They weren't just numbers, they were people. People with families, aspirations, and a love for their country. They deserved far better than to be used as pawns in Trump's political games. Trump throws out this completely baseless DEI conspiracy theory, gets fact-checked in real time, and flounders under pressure. But here's the thing. He's not alone in pushing this garbage. J.D. Vance wasted no time to double down on the same divisive and racist narrative with Maria Bartiromo, further going after DEI policies.
We want to make sure that we try to never have an aviation accident like this again, or at least make them as minimal as possible. And that does, I think, mean that we have to talk about the DEI policies. Now, here's the specific way in which I think the DEI policies of the last administration, the Obama administration, contributed to where we are. We have a massive shortage of air traffic controllers. And in fact, there have been a number of lawsuits from people who would like to become air traffic controllers against the Obama and Biden administration, who were basically said, we were told not even to apply because of the color of our skin, because they were white people who wanted to be air traffic controllers, and under the DEI regime of the Biden administration, they weren't welcome.
Just like Trump, Vance latched onto the idea that DEI is somehow undermining the safety of our air traffic controllers, using it as a convenient scapegoat to distract from their incompetence. Vance parroted Donald Trump's propaganda, claiming that DEI policies are lowering the standard of who gets hired and implying that anyone who isn't white or doesn't fit his narrow definition of qualified should be excluded from important roles like air traffic controllers. But let's break this down. Vance claims to want to hire the best people, but his actions show otherwise. He surrounds himself with a cast of characters who are anything but qualified. Let's start with RFK Jr., Trump's new health secretary, who believes that black Americans should have a different vaccine schedule than white people. Then there's Kash Patel, one of Donald Trump's most loyal allies, who has openly called for turning the FBI into a MAGA museum. And don't forget Pete Hegseth, who proudly brags about not washing his hands for 10 years. These are the best and brightest that Vance and Trump are putting front and center. And if you need more, well, there's Linda McMahon, who Donald Trump appointed to the Department of Education, a role requiring actual expertise in education policy. But McMahon has no background in education, and instead, her appointment reflects loyalty to Trump. McMahon's appointment is a perfect example of how Trump and Vance's best people are often the most unqualified. Then there's Dr. Oz, the TV personality who was placed in a role with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services despite his history of promoting unproven medical advice for fame. These are the best and brightest that Vance and Donald Trump put on display. But instead of focusing on real issues like air traffic controller shortages caused by budget cuts and outdated systems, Vance wants to make DEI the enemy. He's using the same old playbook, stir up racial resentment, distract people from real problems, and keep his base angry, scared, and convinced that they're being replaced by people who are somehow less qualified. But the reality is, DEI doesn't lower standards. It ensures that qualified people, regardless of their race, gender, or disability, have a fair shot at these jobs. Vance's rhetoric isn't about safety. It's about pushing a narrative that divides instead of unites. Vance's comments about DEI policies leading to a shortage of air traffic controllers are not just misleading, they're a damn lie. There are systemic issues, but Vance doesn't want to address those. Instead, he points to DEI as the boogeyman, using race and disability as excuses to divide the public. And just like Trump, Vance tries to pay lip service to the victims, offering his thoughts and prayers, but then immediately pivots to his attack on DEI, making it clear that his priorities are not with the families who lost loved ones, but with continuing to stoke division. Vance shows no empathy for the victims of the crash. Instead of using his platform to mourn the loss of young athletes with bright futures, he uses it to push his agenda, claiming that DEI is putting people's lives at risk. His lip service to the victims is just that, lip service, before diving right back into his racist, divisive rhetoric. Let's be clear, Trump and Vance's rhetoric is a blatant, outright lie. There has never been a policy preventing white people from becoming air traffic controllers. This is straight up fear-mongering to make people believe that their jobs are being taken away by those minorities. At the end of the day, Trump and Vance are using DEI as a scapegoat. They are playing on people's fears and anxieties about change, pushing false narratives that say DEI is threatening their way of life. Vance doesn't care about solving the real issues. He just wants to keep his base angry. But let's not be fooled. This isn't about safety. This is about stoking division. So what do we need to do? we need to push back. We must call out the lies in real time, and we need to make it clear that DEI policies are not the problem. They are a step toward fairness and equality. We need to demand accountability from our leaders and ensure that the truth rises above the noise. If we don't, we'll continue to get more of the same: fear, division, and lies. And that is an absolute fact. Sappers clear the way, airborne all the way.